Okay, welcome back. So here we go again. We're going to continue looking at elements as we kind of learn how to better approach causal analysis. And again, I hate the term root cause analysis, but it's so ubiquitous in business that we kind of have to throw it out there. So elements. I'll quickly transition over here. There we go. All right, so we started with this one in the last video, and I talked about the object, the modification, and the object, right? So we're going 1, 2, 3. Now, we spent a lot of time on this modification piece here, and we said that the types of, let me move this over a little bit, we said that the types of modifications or relationships you can see would be harmful, insufficient, sufficient, absent, or excessive. Okay, so once we understand that, how do we put that into the element? So let's have a look down here. So the way that we're going to build this out, and this is getting us into the construction of functions. The construction of functions is actually it's a difficult process, okay? And it takes a fair bit of practice to really get good at. But this is the beginning, all right? Now, let's look at what we've got here. What I've done in this example is I've taken an insufficient, an excessive, a harmful, and a sufficient modification, and I've included that into an element. So you can see what it looks like when we capture it. Now, another important point to look at here is when we read these elements, we're reading in the direction of that arrow. Okay, so do you see how the arrow is going from the bottom to the top? Okay, so we're reading from bottom to top. And again, we said that was because of the passage of time. And we think about that time cone that we have. So in terms of causal analysis, right, we're always moving from the bottom of the landscape up to the top of the landscape, right? That's our passage of time. So the way that we read these is on the top left here where you've got hallway contains equipment is just that way. The hallway contains equipment. Now, if that doesn't make sense to you, let me just quickly jump back over here. We talked about, get over here. We talked about what was happening in this example where someone stepped out into the hallway and they tripped over something, they fell and they broke their wrist. Okay, so this is relating to that hospital example. And again, that was in one of the very first videos that we did. All right, so if you need to get information on that, you can jump back in there and see that. All right, so what we see here again is that the hallway contains equipment. Now, in this case, you could potentially make an argument and say, well, is that insufficient or is it excessive? Again, this is based on what the owner says or what the group that's helping us conduct the mapping says. In this case, I'm saying it's insufficient. Okay, maybe it's not excessive because we have to have some equipment in the hallway, all right? But it's insufficient insofar as we don't want equipment sitting in the hallway. We'd rather that equipment was sitting in a room. We just don't have any available rooms. Okay, so we're going to say in that case it's insufficient. We can look at another example here, and we can say that a delivery exceeds the customer promise. Now, this one again it's determined by in this case, the customer, okay? And they're saying that the delivery time is excessive, okay? So here, we again denote this by this kind of thick, solid black line. And I'll explain why I use these symbols, these specific symbols in just a second, because one or two of them actually are slightly different to what you'd see in the traditional TRIZ nomenclature. So delivery exceeds the promise, whatever the customer promise is. So in this case, if the customer promises next day delivery, all right, and your delivery doesn't come for 5 days, well then the delivery time has exceeded the customer promise, okay? And again, you'll see this a lot in service environments, especially ones that are critically sort of based in terms of their success on time, all right? All right, the next one here, if we scroll down a little bit, is mask. So the wearing of a mask. And in this case, the wearing of a mask blocks the wearer's view, right? Now, the mask can block your reactions, your facial expressions, but it can also sometimes block your ability to see, especially if you're looking straight down in front of you, right? Because the mask is coming out over your face. So in this case, this is a harmful interaction. And the reason we said it was harmful, and again, this is denoted by this red dashed line. The reason we said this is harmful is because when we look at the causal structure here, this is actually right at the point where the accident's happening, okay? And we know that this is part of the reason why when the nurse or the physician comes out of the room and trips, that part of the tripping is due to limited visibility. Okay, so this is what we call a harmful interaction. And again, you'll see probably 60 to 70, or maybe a little bit more, 70% of the elements that we include in a causal landscape diagram are actually sufficient. Okay, and that's what you see here. So this solid black line, the skinny solid black line, is actually telling us that when the nurse interprets the vital signs, that interpretation is sufficient. There's no issue with that. We don't have a problem with that. Okay, so what you're seeing again is you're seeing two objects. You're seeing one object modify another object, and again, we're going to go into more detail in this on another video. But you're seeing one object modify a second object, and we're looking specifically at the nature of the modification, the nature of the relationship. And again, we're bringing the modification into the element. Okay, so you can see in one snapshot what's happening in that function, in that container, in that space. So if again we look at how this would sit, let me move this over just a little bit, how this would sit in terms of our causal landscape diagram, what we're starting to see is elements come in a certain space at a certain point in time, right? So we know that the hallway exists in the hospital. We talked about this in the previous video. And we can also see that now we've got our element here where the mask blocks the view, and we know that that's a harmful interaction, okay? So this is starting to flesh out that causal landscape diagram picture. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Again, if there's any questions on this, if you're not quite clear on some of these things, please let me know in the comments. Also, sorry, I forgot to mention, with these relationships here, in the traditional TRIZ methodology, for a harmful relationship, they use a red squiggly line. I still use that sometimes if I'm sketching, but I really like to use Visio. A lot of companies have Visio, so it's easy for us to collaborate when we're creating a causal landscape diagram. And, and if you're using a BPMN stencil or just the standard line stencils, these are all available to you. You just simply change the color. So that's why you don't see this as a wavy line, you just see it as a red line. Okay, so hence why we're using these particular stencils. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Again, if it doesn't make sense, put your questions in the comments below. I'll happily look at those questions and try to give you some feedback and hopefully give you some clarity if it wasn't clear already. All right, thanks for that, and we'll see you in the next video.